Kia ora, my name's Bridget Cool. I'm going to be presenting on behalf of colleagues from the University of Auckland on MMIs Online, a partnership between teaching and professional staff. Multiple mini interviews are focused encounters with access and assess a range of attributes in order to gain more objectively multiple impressions of an applicant's interpersonal skills, their general demeanour and their thoughtfulness. They don't require any specified learned content knowledge, and they usually cover 4 domains: critical thinking, ethical decision making, communication and knowledge of the healthcare. They're reasonably valid and reliable in the selection of medical students, and they've increasingly been used in the selection of students in other health professional programs. They're traditionally conducted face-to-face, usually 5 to 12 stations. Each station comprises an encounter with one interviewer of usually 5 to 8 minutes duration, and the candidates are rated using either a Likert scale or normative scoring rubrics. MMI at the University of Auckland is a key selection tool for our limited entry clinical programs: medicine, pharmacy, optometry, audiology, medical imaging, dietetics and nutrition. And MMIs contribute between 25 and 50% of the selection weightings for these programs. We have a governance committee that ensures that MMI continues to meet the intended aims and the process is robust and reliable. Usually we have about 900 applicants per year that are interviewed in person. They rotate through 8 stations. They have 2 minutes to read the scenario and 6 minutes to respond. These scenarios assess a range of attributes, including critical thinking, empathy, health issue awareness, and many more. Each station assesses about 3 to 4 attributes, and interviewers, who are predominantly health professionals, assess applicant performance. Now, due to the uncertainties created by COVID in 2020, we elected to shift to online MMIs in light of the substantial amount of organisation that's required to do them in person. So what did we change? It was a huge collaboration between professional and teaching staff. Due to the resourcing challenges and the lack of previous experience of doing this online, we decided that applicants would complete only 3 scenarios compared with the usual 8, and therefore we'd assess 12 attributes rather than 24. Each candidate would be evaluated on all 3 scenarios by a panel of 2 interviewers, compared with usually 1 scenario per 1 interviewer. And that would provide us with 24 points of assessment. Zoom links were created with waiting rooms for each of the 3 MMI scenarios. We had an interactive interview training webinar was held, which included a recorded role play of an MMI session. A candidate training program video was also developed for applicants, along with web pages to provide information regarding the online process. I'll just take a moment to share with you the training that we developed for interviewers, and it does use some actors, myself included.
In some of my meetings, I've had people's children and pets appear. Here's our first question. I'll leave you to read it.
Thank you.
Okay, so you've had that opportunity to have a look. Michelle Snow, do you understand the scenario and the task?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Great. So do you want to kick off?
Yeah, well, I find that a rather interesting statistic, and actually quite an unsurprising one, really. For many, I think, particularly, anxiety is more a kind of a reaction to stress that a lot of people tend to have, and now it's become something that we're much more aware of, or at least able to pinpoint and to try and manage. And these things I don't think come just from study or work, although I know in this particular example that, talking about students, but there are lots of stresses and pressures from various different aspects of life in general for everyone.
Yes.
That I think can cause stress.
I'm going to stop that there. You can see that in this case that Michelle, who's playing the role of the student, is quite confident, and often that's not the case, and in fact students or candidates may struggle to answer the question. So the interviewers are given a series of prompts they can use to draw out responses from the candidates. You'll note that I was role-playing, assessing the candidate as they went along, and then when this scenario, the 6 minutes, was up, then the next scenario would be placed up. I would ask the next or address the next scenario while Andy observed, and he would be assessing it as well as myself, and then he would answer the next scenario. So here's an example of a practice scenario that we give to candidates. These are put on the website, and this one, the question is, do you think that non-academic hobbies or pastimes can add to a person's ability to be a good health professional? Can you think of an example in your case? So in the text there, it gives them some examples of how they might respond to this, the sorts of things or the attributes that the interviewer will be looking for, and really gives them some hopefully sense of comfort that they don't need to have knowledge. It's really how they construct a response to the question, and there'll be a number of these that they can look at. So how did it work on the day? Applicants connected to Zoom from home. For students who perhaps had unstable internet or didn't have a quiet place to carry out the interview at home, they were able to book spaces in the library. Station managers were based at the university in a dedicated space, and you'll see this is actually a photo of the station managers. So they'll each be helping the interviewers and the candidate through their session. Interviewers were located in an adjacent room at individual computer stations, and in that room we had interviewer room hosts who kept us fed and watered and on track. So interviewers introduced themselves to the candidate, and then once advised to start, as you saw in the video, would commence with the first scenario. Interviewer 1 asked the candidate about scenario 1 for about 6 minutes, and then the process was repeated for scenario 2 and 3. On completion of the session, the interviewers and the station manager wished the student well. Interviewers completed their assessor's sheet while the station manager got ready for the next session. And you note that we have a separate but aligned process for candidates applying under our Māori and Pacific admission scheme. So here's an example of the assessor sheet. You can see here are the 4 attributes that this particular scenario is assessing: communication, empathy, quality of argument, and self-awareness. There's another box here at the very bottom. Do you have any concerns about the student? And part of the mandatory training that the interviewers do, they're advised about what we consider significant concerns. So the first box there is asking their ability to communicate in a healthcare setting in English. And the second one are general concerns. This could be a candidate who's extremely anxious, very nervous, or responds to a question in an entirely inappropriate way. So here's an image of the interviewer room. So you can see an interviewer with a headset, a monitor, and they're spaced. We had 9 days of MMIs. They ran in the morning and the afternoon. We had 20 interviewers in each session, including 12 students per session. So overall, we interviewed 840 applicants, participated in the online MMI, assisted by 40 station managers who were mainly volunteers and predominantly professional staff. We had 200 interviewers who were a mix of staff and members of the general public. 40 applicants were without reliable internet, so they were the ones who were able to get bookings for them in the library, where they had someone who was an invigilator, kept an eye on them to make sure they followed the correct processes. We did an evaluation post-MMI of the interviewers, and those who had participated before, they preferred a face-to-face interview, but they did acknowledge that given the restrictions, it was a highly acceptable alternative. Some enjoyed the opportunity to work with other interviewers because ordinarily you're in a room on your own, so that was a positive feedback. So what we learned? Well, the strengths were it was a more equitable way to assess students, so they didn't have to come up to Auckland, which can be very expensive for out-of-town students or candidates. Definitely candidates were less stressed. They're in their own environments. They weren't stressed about getting to the university, finding a park, public transport. And overall, it needed less resource from a coordination perspective. So when we do it face-to-face, each student has a helper who accompanies them to each station. So we didn't have those costs. The limitations, there was a sense of loss of the actor station. That is quite popular with interviewers, not so popular with the students sometimes. It's probably the one they get most stressed on. Fewer scenarios were assessed, 3 compared with 8, and fewer attributes were assessed, 12 compared with 24. So what are we going to do for this year? Well, we're looking at some proprietary software to run the MMIs online. If that proves that the proprietary software is not fit for purpose or it's prohibitively expensive, then we will do a repeat of what we did in 2020 with some modifications. So it's likely that we'll increase the number of scenarios. But all in all, we were really pleased. And as I say at the outset, it was a fantastic collaboration between professional and teaching staff. Here's some references that I referred to in my first slide, and contact details if you want to make contact. So thank you for listening.